Okay. I apologize for the interruptions on the internet connection, but this will be part 2. We're going to continue where we just left off, so I'm going to correct this a bit. Alright. So we just finished. We talked about the before we buy, the tricuspid valve in between the right atrium and the right ventricle versus the bicuspid valve over in the left atrium and left ventricle in between those two. The other two valves we want to talk about are the number 1, the pulmonic valve, and number 2, the aortic valve. Now, your tricuspid and bicuspid are entrance valves into the ventricles. Tricuspid allows blood to enter into the right ventricle, and the bicuspid allows blood to enter into the left ventricle. Now, the pulmonic and aortic valves allow blood to exit, respectively. The pulmonic allows blood to exit from the right ventricle. Remember, the right side of the heart pumps blood to the lungs in the pulmonary circulation. So, pulmonary circulation, pulmonic valve. You should be able to click that one together. So, the pulmonic valve will allow blood to leave the right ventricle and go to the pulmonary circulation. Blood comes back in on the left side and goes to the bicuspid to go into the left ventricle, but it then exits toward the left side of the body, or left side of the heart, pumps blood to the body, and that goes to the aorta. So this will blood leaves the left side of the left ventricle and is pumped through the aortic valve. So hopefully having those two connections will help you kind of piece together and not get confused, because there are a few parts and it's easy to get confused. But remember, we come into the right atrium, go through the tricuspid valve, we try before we buy. We're in the right ventricle now. We need to pump blood through the pulmonary circulation to get reoxygenated, so it's going through the pulmonic valve. And when it comes back to the left side of the heart, the left atrium, it goes to the bicuspid, because we've done tried it, now we're going to buy it. So it's the bicuspid into the left ventricle, and the left ventricle is going to contract, and we're wanting to send blood through the whole body, which goes through the aorta. So we're going to go out the aortic valve. Alright, and that's the basics of the valves. Now, we're going to talk about some blood vessels, another part of the anatomy. Your blood vessels, you got two main types. You've got veins versus your arteries. Now, all the time you'll see these diagrams of bodies, and they'll have the blue vessels and they'll have the red vessels. And most of the time, typically, we hear people say, well, the blue ones are veins and the red ones are arteries. Well, most of the time that's correct. As far as your systemic circulation throughout your whole body, the veins carry deoxygenated blood back to the heart, and arteries carry oxygenated blood from the heart to the body. Now, you don't want to get confused. I've seen some people really get confused on tests and miss this question of what do arteries do or what do veins do, and they think it's oxygenated versus deoxygenated blood. Well, it's right in the systemic circulation, but not in the pulmonic or the pulmonary circulation when it goes to your lungs. The real definition here is arteries take blood away from the heart. Your veins take blood to the heart. So, yes, when it's pumping through the body, your arteries have oxygenated blood and your veins have deoxygenated blood. But when it goes to your lungs, your arteries taking that deoxygenated blood away from the heart and to the lungs to get reoxygenated. So your pulmonary arteries are deoxygenated, and your pulmonary veins take the oxygenated blood back to the heart. So really, our veins go to the heart, arteries go away from the heart. And each one, arteries and veins, they break down into basically 3 different categories pretty much. For your arteries, your big artery, you start out in your aorta. You have the aortic arch around the heart. You can see that right here, this big tube that comes out and pumps around. That's your aortic arch here. But you have your aorta, which is your big main vessel that runs up and down your torso. And then it branches out, gets a little bit smaller, and these are your arteries. Brachial, femoral, those sorts of deal. And after that, it breaks down into even smaller vessels carrying blood still away from the body, or away from the heart, excuse me. And these are your arterioles. Now, after your arterioles, you go into another sort of vessel called your capillary. And these are between arteries and veins. This is where your actual gas exchange and nutrient exchange takes place inside the body. It's not in the actual other vessels, it's in these capillaries, because they have the smaller lining, smaller wall that allow for transport of these things to go in between. So you have these capillaries, and after your exchange takes place out in the tissues or in the lungs, your capillaries feed into your venules. You have arterioles, which are really small arteries, and your venules are really small veins. And the blood's collecting from all over, and they filter up, kind of like the roots on a tree. They start out small, and they get bigger, and then the small ones are venules, the bigger ones are veins, and then you have the big trunk, and that's the vena cava in the veins case. And the vena cava and the aorta, both sort of the big ones, both of them run up through your torso area. So that should be a good intro into all the different sorts of vessels. But what are they carrying? Well, we know they're carrying blood, but what's in the blood? This is something we got to figure out. So we got a few different things. We got white blood cells, we got red blood cells, we got platelets and plasma, pretty much. You also have some other nutrients. You have, your blood sugar and some hormones and those sort of things that are carried. But mainly the big components are your cells, platelets, and your plasma. Now, your cells, you white and red blood cells. Red blood cells, you have your erythrocytes. Okay? White blood cells, there's a few different sorts of them. We're not going to go into that in this introduction section. But there are several different types of white blood cells. Essentially, but these two put together, white and red blood cells, account for approximately 45% of your blood. Okay? But it's not split 50-50. You have about one white blood cell for every 600 to 700 red blood cells. So the red blood cells are very dominant. You have a lot more of those. We'll get into the function of that in a little bit. But white blood cells, like we said, they help to fight infection. They can actually seek out and destroy foreign invaders, so to say, the foreign bodies or bacteria in your system. They actually bind to those and destroy those. They can white blood cells can help produce antibodies, which also fight infection and keep you from being sick. So white blood cells have a very important role. The different types of white blood cells function differently. But just know white blood cells, they help keep us healthy. So they're very important. Red blood cells, on the other hand, a little bit different. They have on them what's called hemoglobin, and the hemoglobin will actually bind to oxygen. So this is kind of a big deal, and you see the importance of having, maybe that's a little behind the scenes on why there's so many red blood cells as opposed to white blood cells. Now when you get sick, your white blood cell count, you might see it increase trying to fight infections, and certain treatments can actually lower your white blood cells because it's killing everything. But red blood cells help carry oxygen, and they also help carry CO2. They help get rid of CO2 out of the body from your tissues. After the tissues use the oxygen, then CO2 is a byproduct, and that's not good for our bodies. Our bodies don't like the CO2, so we need to get that and get it out. So the hemoglobin will help take the CO2 back to the lungs so we can exhale and breathe it out and get it out of our system. And that's really what we want to do. Next function, or next component, platelets. Platelets help with clotting, okay? And that's kind of an important thing as well. If we couldn't clot, then we have to probably be pretty careful with what we did every day, or we'd bleed to death. Anytime the platelets have a particular special function and ability to bind to the inner lining of this blood vessel here. And if that's ever injured, platelets can bind to it and then bind. And eventually, with other mechanisms and pieces of the puzzle, you're going to form a clot. But the platelets help to form that clot. So they play a very important key role here. And this is not just a nick, but if you really think about it, blood is kept inside your blood vessels. So whether it's internal or external bleed, if you're bleeding, you've damaged the blood vessel. So these platelets are going to really help out, and they're going to help that clotting, help stop that. Now, plasma. Okay, what is plasma? Well, if you saw someone bleeding, you normally think of blood. When you see the blood, you think of a fluid. You don't think of actual solid objects or anything like cells. So what is that? Well, that 55% plasma, we talked about red blood cells and white blood cells. Cells are approximately 45% of our blood. Well, plasma is the other 55%. So most of our blood is plasma. And the plasma is the fluid essentially that carries the platelets and the cells around through the vessels. Okay, so we've got a good idea of the anatomy, okay, and we have a good idea of what's in the blood, but how does the blood get where it's going? How does it pump? How does the cardiovascular system pump this blood through the body? Well, it's through electrical conduction. But the cardiac system and the cardiac cells are special than other cells in the body. Your rest of your body has your nervous system with your neurons, and they have their own electrical thing going on. But your cardiac cells, your heart is very special. These cells have in the heart. These cells have a special characteristic called automaticity, which gives them the special ability to create electrical impulses. Okay? So they don't have to wait for a signal from the brain to send down and tell the heart, hey, you need to beat right now. These cardiac cells have that special ability. And we're going to talk about some nodes and the actual normal electrical pathway through the heart. First, you have the SA node, or the sinoatrial node. And that's normally located here up in the right atrium. This is nicknamed the pacemaker of the heart, because in a normal healthy human being, this is where your heart rhythm and rate originates. All the electrical current for your heart originates right there in the SA node. And this electrical signal is going to start and it's going to fire and go through the atrium. It's going to go both over to the left atrium and down to the right atrium. And it's going to make those atrium help contract a little bit. Now it's going to get to the next node called the AV node, or the atrioventricular node. Now, this node has a very special function as well. It actually has a built-in pulse in it, so to say. And what this does is the electrical current is flowing, and I'm going to use this model because you can see this a little bit better in the PowerPoint. But it will say excuse me. The electrical current started up here in the SA node and flows through the atrium and got to the AV node. Well, the atrium have contracted a little bit, and the blood has been pumped down to the tricuspid and bicuspid and filled the right and left ventricles respectively. So there's a pause in here. Why? Now, if there was not a pause, then when your blood, if your blood came down into your ventricles and there was no pause here, then your ventricles would start to contract before they were filled up with blood. And so your heart would not be as efficient in pumping blood. And overall that would decrease your cardiac output. That would decrease the amount of blood being pumped and affect your pressures. And it really wouldn't be good. So the heart is designed very geniusly with this pause built in right here in the AV node to help give the ventricles time to fill, and then the current will continue and you'll be able to pump more. But after that pause, the electrical current comes down the bundle of His. And the bundle of His right here, and this is called the septum, by the way. I think you can see it right here, this big tissue. All this red is myocardium, which is heart muscle. And you can see right here is the septum, just like the septum in your nose, right in the middle of your nose. That's the septum there. So our electrical current comes down from the AV node through the bundle of His and splits into left and right bundle branch block, or excuse me, bundle branches. We don't need to get into blocks. But you have bundle branches here, left and right, and they come down and turn into Purkinje fibers, which innervate with the tissue and help contract the ventricles. So you're going to start the SA node. It's going to go down to the AV node. You're going to have that pause. Then it's going to go through the bundle of His, the left and right bundle branches, and the Purkinje fibers. Now, what I like about this diagram up here is actually these red arrows that show the conduction, right? It's showing it going down and coming back up, going down and coming back up. Well, what's the purpose of this? Why doesn't it just contract down? Well, what I like to think of, essentially, is if you had, say, a water balloon, okay, and it was, you put some water in it, but you didn't tie it off, okay, and I'm holding it, and it's got water in there, so it's really filled up, and I just start to contract, and I squeeze my hand and push down. That water has nowhere to go. It can't go up because I'm squeezing it down, and the exit is above my hand, so it can't come up through the top. Well, when this electrical current comes down and then back up like that, then it squeezes from the bottom up, makes the heart very efficient at maximizing cardiac output. Okay, so it's helping squeeze, going down and coming up, and helping squeeze the blood out of the heart. We talked about how it pumps, but how does it know how fast to pump? Well, that's another issue that we can address. There's such thing as called intrinsic rates. Okay, and these intrinsic rates are like natural tendencies, you could say, and it splits the heart into three groups: the atrium, which the atrium at the top of the heart. Well, if we hold it like this, it's at the top of the heart. But the atrium, then you have your AV junction or junctional area, which is kind of in the middle right here, and then you have your ventricles down at the bottom. Your atrium up top, this is where our SA node is, our pacemaker of the heart, remember, and that's at the top. Now what's our normal resting heart rate for a human adult? 60 to 100. So if you can take a guess at what the intrinsic rate of the atrium is, if that is where the SA node is, 60 to 100, exactly. So the atrium, it naturally beats within 60 to 100 beats per minute. If it's too fast or too slow, something's affecting it, something's wrong, and it needs to be worked on. Now, say that SA node, sinoatrial node, your pacemaker, isn't working correctly. Some other part of the heart has to take over. If that cell that was taking place of the pacemaker, if it was in the junctional area here, then that has an intrinsic rate of 40 to 60, a little bit slower here. And if it, say that didn't work and the ventricles were initiating, their normal rate is 20 to 40, a lot slower. Now you see it drops 60 to 100 in atrium, 40 to 60 in the junctional area, and ventricles are 20 to 40. Now why this drop? Well, this actually allows for proper mechanical function of the heart. So it prevents the lower areas with lower intrinsic rates from overpowering the atrium, your normal pacemaker. A 20 to 40 is not going to overpower a 60 to 100. It just can't do it. It doesn't beat fast enough to overpower it. They can, but normally we're talking about a normal healthy heart here in this area, in this section or lesson. So they won't, and that will allow for normal mechanical function and efficiency in the heart. So, alright, we've covered what the heart is for, or the cardiovascular system for, what it does, the parts, the anatomy. We've covered electrical, how it pumps, how fast, how fast to go. What's left? Blood flow. And we talked about this a little bit, but we're really going to get into it now and really cover it. I've got it listed up here, and this is pretty much from start and all the way down to finish. Okay? And remember, you can pick wherever you want as the starting line, but it's just continual. It's continuing. It never stops. So whatever you want to pick as your starting point is fine. The best way to learn this stuff, in my opinion, is to actually get these models out. And I'd like to have some class time to work with students and get hands-on on these models and actually trace it themselves. And we get some handouts work good too if they can draw it. I actually tried to, when I was learning, I tried to draw it myself. I found that there's a lot of lines crossing here and there, and that made it a little bit more confusing to draw, because I'm not the best artist in the world, but it helped me still nonetheless. So we're going to talk about the blood flow. And where I'm going to start is the right atrium. So get that over here with me. In your right atrium, essentially it's top right. Okay? The right atrium is filled with blood. And then what's our saying we remember for the valves? Try before you buy. That's right. So right atrium is filled with blood, and that electrical current starts, and we're pumping blood through the right atrium to the right ventricle through the try before you buy tricuspid valve. That ventricle fills up here. It fills up with blood, and then it's pumping, and we've got to send blood. This is deoxygenated, remember, so we're sending blood to the pulmonary circulation to get reoxygenated. See me a little bit better. You're going to get reoxygenated here through the pulmonary. So we're going through the pulmonic valve, pulmonic arteries, pulmonary arteries, into the capillaries, pulmonary capillaries, and it's wrapped around the lungs. This blood is getting rid of its CO2, it's bringing in O2, and we're coming back into the pulmonary veins. You can actually see them coming in on the back here. They're actually feeding into the left atrium here, right there. You can see them coming in the back, the holes right there. You see those, yeah? Okay. And it's going to come in there, and now we're needing to go into the left ventricle to be pumped through the body. And we tried it first, now we're going to buy it. So the bicuspid valve feeds the blood down into the left ventricle, right? That contraction is going to take place again. The ventricles will contract and pump the blood. We're going to the artery, so we're going through the aorta.